mining station Kepler 442 floated in the darkness between stars, its hull scarred by countless asteroid impacts and solar flares. Deep in the station's mechanical bay, Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands and stared at the broken fusion drive that had been giving him trouble for 3 weeks. The other mechanics had given up on it, declaring it beyond repair, but Jake never gave up on anything. That's when the alarm started screaming. Red lights bathed the corridor as Jake dropped his tools and ran toward the command center. Through the station's observation windows, he could see something that made his blood freeze. A massive shape moved through space, easily 3 times the size of their mining vessel. It wasn't any ship design he recognized. Commander Chen's voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands to battle stations. We have an unidentified vessel approaching. It's not responding to our communications." Jake reached the command center just as the thing came into full view. It wasn't a ship at all. It was alive. The creature stretched nearly 200 meters from nose to tail, covered in scales that gleamed like black metal. 4 powerful wings beat slowly, propelling it through the vacuum of space as if it were swimming through water. Its head was triangular, filled with teeth the size of support beams, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire that could be seen even from this distance. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's xenobiologist. "It's a space dragon." The stories were true. Jake had heard the legends. Deep space miners and cargo haulers sometimes told tales of massive creatures that lived in the void between stars, feeding on solar radiation and hunting ships for sport. Most people dismissed them as space madness or too much synthetic alcohol, but here one was, real and terrifying, circling their station like a predator sizing up its prey. "Can we outrun it?" asked Commander Chen. "Not with our engines in this condition," replied Chief Engineer Martinez. "We're sitting ducks." The dragon creature suddenly accelerated, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. It slammed into the station's outer hull with tremendous force, sending everyone sprawling. The lights flickered, and Jake could hear the groaning of metal under stress. "Hull breach in Section 7, reported Lieutenant Torres from her console. "Emergency barriers are holding, but barely." Through the observation window, Jake watched the creature pull back and prepare for another attack. Its movements were deliberate, intelligent. This wasn't just some mindless beast. It was hunting them with purpose and strategy. "Sir," Dr. Kim said, her voice shaking, "according to my readings, this creature is extremely aggressive. Its brain activity suggests high intelligence, but also intense hostility toward artificial structures. It sees our station as a threat to be eliminated." The dragon struck again, this time targeting the communications array. Sparks flew as the equipment was torn apart by massive claws. The station shuddered under the impact, and Jake realized they had maybe 2 more hits before the hull gave way completely. "Weapons?" Commander Chen asked desperately. "Mining lasers only, sir. They might tickle it, but they won't stop something that size." Jake stared at the creature as it prepared for another attack. There had to be something they could do. He'd spent his whole life fixing broken things, finding solutions where others saw only problems. His mind raced, remembering everything he'd learned about animal behavior from his childhood on Earth's agricultural colonies. "Commander," Jake said suddenly, "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. At this point, Morrison, I'll listen to anything. I need to get close to that thing, face to face." The command center fell silent except for the humming of emergency power systems. Everyone stared at Jake as if he'd lost his mind. "That's suicide," Dr. Kim said. "The creature is extremely hostile. It would kill you before you got within 50 meters. "Maybe," Jake replied, his eyes still fixed on the dragon. "But I've been studying its movements. It's not just attacking randomly. It's testing us, trying to understand what we are. That suggests intelligence, and intelligence means it might be possible to communicate." Commander Chen shook his head. "Even if that's true, how do you plan to communicate with something that breathes vacuum and shoots plasma from its mouth?" Jake turned away from the window and faced the others. His expression was calm, determined. "I've been practicing hypnosis for years. Started as a hobby, but I got good at it. Really good. I can calm aggressive animals, help people with trauma, even influence behavior in ways that seem impossible. If that creature is intelligent, maybe I can reach its mind." "You want to hypnotize a space dragon?" Lieutenant Torres asked incredulously. "It's not as crazy as it sounds," Jake said. "Hypnosis works on the same basic principles regardless of species. Eye contact, rhythm, repetitive patterns. finding the right frequency to synchronize with brainwaves. If I can establish contact, I might be able to calm it down, show it we're not a threat. The station shuddered again as the dragon struck the outer hull. This time Jake could hear the sound of tearing metal. They were running out of time. Commander Chen looked around at his crew, then back at Jake. What do you need? A maintenance pod with full life support, and everyone needs to stay calm while I'm out there. No sudden movements, no weapon charges, nothing that might set it off. Dr. Kim grabbed Jake's arm. This is insane. We don't know anything about this creature's psychology. What if hypnosis just makes it more aggressive? Jake gently removed her hand and headed toward the maintenance bay. Then we'll all die anyway. At least this way, we're trying something instead of just waiting. As he suited up and climbed into the small maintenance pod, Jake felt the familiar calm that came over him before any difficult repair job. This was just another problem to solve, another broken thing to fix. The only difference was that this time, the broken thing might be the relationship between two species who had never met before. The pod's engines hummed to life, and Jake guided it toward the airlock. Through the small viewport, he could see the dragon floating in space, its massive head turned toward the station. Those burning eyes seemed to look right through him, and for a moment Jake wondered if he was about to become the first human to be eaten by a space dragon. But there was no turning back now. The station depended on him, and Jake Morrison had never walked away from a job that needed doing. The maintenance pod drifted silently through the void, its small engines barely audible over Jake's steady breathing. Through the reinforced viewport, the space dragon grew larger with each passing second. Up close, it was even more magnificent and terrifying than Jake had imagined. Each scale was the size of a dinner plate, overlapping in perfect patterns that seemed to shift and change in the starlight. The creature's wings moved in slow, hypnotic waves, and Jake realized they weren't just for propulsion. They were also radiating excess heat, glowing with a faint amber light that pulsed in rhythm with what must be the dragon's heartbeat. The creature noticed his approach immediately. Its massive head swiveled toward the tiny pod, and Jake found himself staring into eyes that burned like miniature suns. They were intelligent eyes, ancient and curious, but filled with unmistakable hostility. The dragon's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of crystalline teeth that sparked with electrical energy. Jake's hands trembled on the pod's controls, but he forced himself to remain calm. Fear would doom them all. He activated the pod's external lights, creating a steady rhythmic pattern. Flash pause, like a heartbeat made of light. The dragon's head tilted, watching the lights with obvious interest. Its aggressive posture shifted slightly, becoming more curious than threatening. Jake took this as encouragement and began to speak, even though he knew the creature couldn't hear him through the vacuum. "Easy there, big guy," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just want to talk." He adjusted the pod's lights, making them pulse in a slower, more hypnotic rhythm. The dragon's eyes followed the pattern, and Jake noticed its breathing seemed to be synchronizing with the flashes. This was the first principle of hypnosis working across species barriers. Back on the station, the crew watched in stunned silence through the observation windows. Commander Chen stood with his finger hovering over the weapon controls, ready to fire if the dragon showed any sign of attacking Jake's pod. "His vital signs are steady," Dr. Kim reported, monitoring Jake's bio readings. "Heart rate elevated but controlled. He's maintaining focus." The dragon suddenly moved, but not to attack. Instead, it began circling the small pod in wide, graceful arcs. Jake rotated his craft to keep facing the creature, maintaining eye contact through the viewport. The dragon's movements were becoming more fluid, less aggressive. The electrical discharge around its teeth had stopped, and its wing beats were taking on the same rhythm as Jake's light pattern. "It's working," whispered Lieutenant Torres. "Look at its posture. It's actually calming down." Jake could feel it too. There was a moment when everything clicked into place, like the final piece of a complex puzzle sliding home. The dragon's eyes locked onto his, and suddenly Jake felt a presence in his mind. Not thoughts exactly, but emotions, curiosity, loneliness. And underneath it all, a deep, aching hunger. The creature was intelligent, ancient beyond human comprehension, and utterly alone. It had been drifting through space for centuries, maybe millennia, feeding on stellar radiation and searching for something it couldn't quite understand. The mining station had triggered something in its memory, a vague recognition of artificial structures that meant other intelligent life. But the dragon had been alone so long that it had forgotten how to communicate without violence. Every encounter with other species had ended in destruction, not because it was evil, but because it simply didn't know any other way to make contact. Jake felt tears forming in his eyes as he understood the creature's profound isolation. He adjusted the light pattern again, making it warmer, more welcoming. The dragon responded by moving closer until its massive head was only a few meters from the pod's viewport. This close, Jake could see details that amazed him. The dragon's scales weren't just armor. They were covered in intricate patterns that looked almost like circuit boards, glowing with soft bioluminescence. Its eyes weren't just burning orbs, but complex optical systems that could probably see across multiple spectrums of light. "You're not just a space dragon," Jake murmured. "You're a living starship." The creature's head tilted again, and Jake realized it was somehow sensing his emotions through their strange connection. He focused on projecting calm, friendly thoughts, images of cooperation, of working together instead of fighting. The dragon pulled back slightly and began to change. Jake watched in amazement as bony ridges along its neck started to glow brighter, creating patterns of light that matched the rhythm Jake had established with his pod systems. The creature was trying to communicate back using its own body as a signal lamp. "Commander," Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "I think it's trying to talk to us." "Talk to us?" Commander Chen replied. "Morrison, that thing nearly destroyed our station." "Because it doesn't know how else to get attention," Jake said, still maintaining eye contact with the dragon. "It's been alone for so long that violence is the only communication method it remembers. But it's learning. Watch." The dragon's light patterns became more complex, creating what looked almost like a written language made of bioluminescence. Jake couldn't read it, but he could feel the emotion behind it. The creature was trying to say hello. Jake carefully maneuvered his pod closer until he was almost touching the dragon's snout. This should have been suicide, but somehow he knew the creature wouldn't hurt him now. The connection between them was growing stronger. "I need to try something," Jake said into his radio. "Dr. Kim, can you patch me into the station's main computer? I want to create a more complex light pattern." "Jake, what are you planning?" Dr. Kim's voice was worried. "I'm going to try to teach it our language. If it's as intelligent as I think it is, it should be able to learn basic communication symbols." Working through the station's computer, Jake began projecting simple mathematical concepts using the pod's lights. 1 flash, pause, 2 flashes, pause, 3 flashes. Then simple addition, 1 + 1 = 2. The dragon watched intently, its own bioluminescent patterns shifting as it processed the information. After several minutes, it began flashing back. 1 flash, 2 flashes, 3 flashes. Then, incredibly, it showed Jake 4 flashes, 5 flashes, 6 flashes. It was continuing the sequence. "Dear God," Dr. Kim breathed over the radio. "It's learning. It's actually learning our mathematics." Jake smiled and moved on to more complex concepts, basic geometry, then simple words represented by specific light patterns. Hello. Friend. Peace. The dragon absorbed everything with an eagerness that was almost childlike, despite its ancient presence. But just as Jake was beginning to feel they were making real progress, something went wrong. The dragon suddenly pulled back, its eyes flaring with renewed hostility. Its mouth opened, revealing those crystalline teeth crackling with electrical energy once again. "Jake, get out of there," Commander Chen shouted. Something spooked it. Through their mental connection, Jake felt what had triggered the dragon's reaction. It had sensed something else approaching through space, something that filled the ancient creature with terror and rage. Jake looked through his pod's rear sensors and saw them. 3 sleek ships with hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The dragon hunters had found them. Jake had heard whispers about them in the outer colonies, a secret organization that tracked down and killed space dragons for their exotic biology. They used the creature's crystalline teeth for advanced weapons, their scales for unbreakable armor, and their bioluminescent organs for navigation systems that could see through hyperspace itself. The dragon's fear washed over Jake like a wave. This creature had survived encounters with the dragon hunters before, had watched others of its kind die screaming as they were harvested for parts. That's why it attacked stations and ships on sight. It had learned that contact with other species usually meant death, but now Jake was here. a human who had shown it kindness and communication. The dragon was torn between its learned fear and its desperate need for connection. Jake could feel its internal struggle through their link, and he knew that the next few minutes would determine whether they could maintain their fragile bond or whether the ancient creature would return to its cycle of violent isolation. The hunter ships were closing fast, their weapon systems already charging. Jake had to make a choice: retreat to safety or stay and try to help the first truly alien intelligence humanity had ever encountered. There was really no choice at all. Jake made his decision in an instant. Instead of retreating, he pushed his maintenance pod closer to the dragon's massive head. Through their mental connection, he projected a single, clear emotion: trust. "Jake, what are you doing?" Commander Chen's voice crackled with static as the hunter ship's jamming systems began interfering with communications. "Something crazy," Jake replied, his hands dancing over the pod's controls. "But maybe crazy enough to work." The dragon hunters' vessels were unlike anything in the standard ship databases. Their hulls seemed to drink in starlight, creating patches of absolute darkness against the starfield. Jake could see weapon ports opening along their sides, revealing arrays of crystalline projectiles that glowed with the same inner fire as dragon teeth. They were using harvested dragon parts as ammunition. The space dragon's terror spiked as it recognized the weapons. Jake felt the creature's impulse to flee, but also its exhaustion. This ancient being had been running for so long that it barely remembered what it was like to stand and fight. "Not this time," Jake whispered, pressing his hand against the pod's viewport. "You don't have to run anymore." Through their growing connection, Jake began projecting memories from his own past. Times when he'd been afraid but had chosen to face his fears anyway. The day he'd stood up to bullies as a child. The moment he'd volunteered for deep space assignment, despite his fear of the void. The countless times he'd fixed impossible problems by refusing to give up. The dragon's massive eye fixed on him, and Jake felt its surprise. This tiny creature in the metal shell was offering to help. The concept was so alien to the dragon's experience that it didn't know how to process it. The hunter ships were closing fast, moving in a coordinated attack pattern. Jake could see their targeting systems painting the dragon with crimson light, preparing for the killing strikes that would paralyze the creature before the harvest began. "Station, this is Jake. I need you to do exactly what I tell you. And I need you to trust me completely." "Morrison, those are military-grade ships," Commander Chen replied. "We can't fight them." "We're not going to fight them," Jake said, his voice taking on the calm, hypnotic tone he used during his deepest trance sessions. "We're going to make them fight each other." Jake began speaking in the rhythmic, soothing cadence he'd perfected over years of practice. But this time he wasn't just trying to hypnotize the dragon. Through their mental link, he was using the creature's own telepathic abilities to project his influence outward. "Commander, I need you to open a channel to the hunter ships. All frequencies. Are you insane? They'll trace our signal and target us. Do it. Trust me." Reluctantly, Commander Chen opened the communication channels. Jake immediately began broadcasting, his voice flowing over the airways like honey mixed with steel. "Hunter ships, this is Jake Morrison of Mining Station Kepler 442. You are operating in violation of interstellar law by attacking a peaceful research facility." The lead hunter ship responded immediately, its captain's voice cold and mechanical. "Stand down, civilian vessel. We are conducting a legal hunt under emergency provisions. Do not interfere." Jake smiled grimly and continued speaking in his hypnotic rhythm. Through his connection with the dragon, he could feel the alien creature's telepathic abilities amplifying his words, giving them an almost supernatural quality. "You call yourselves hunters, but you're nothing more than scavengers. You prey on ancient beings that were exploring the cosmos before your species learned to make fire. Where's the honor in that? Our mission parameters do not include moral debates with mining colonists," the hunter captain replied. But Jake noticed a slight change in the man's tone. The hypnotic cadence was starting to work. Jake pressed his advantage, his voice becoming more compelling with each word. The dragon's telepathic field was spreading his influence across all three hunter ships, reaching into the minds of their crews. "Look at what you're doing. Look at who you're serving. You joined the hunters to protect humanity, didn't you? To explore the unknown and keep our colonies safe. But when did you become the monsters that parents tell their children about in bedtime stories?" On the hunter ships, crew members were beginning to pause at their stations. Jake's words, amplified by alien telepathy, were cutting through years of conditioning and propaganda. They were remembering why they'd joined the service in the first place. "Captain," one of the hunter crew members said over an open channel, "maybe we should reconsider. This creature hasn't actually attacked anyone." "Maintain focus," the hunter captain snapped, but Jake could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "The creature is a Class 5 threat. Protocol requires immediate termination." Jake continued his hypnotic assault, weaving doubt and conscience into every word. Through his link with the dragon, he could feel the creature's amazement. This small human was doing something impossible, turning the hunters' own minds against them. "Protocol," Jake repeated, his voice dripping with carefully controlled disdain. "You've let protocol replace thinking. You've let fear replace wisdom. Look at this creature, really look at it. Does it seem like a mindless monster to you?" As if responding to his words, the dragon began to glow brighter. Its bioluminescent patterns created a display of such beauty that even the hardened hunter crews stopped to stare. The creature was painting pictures with light, showing images of its long journey through space, its desperate search for others like itself, its loneliness stretching across the centuries. "By the void," whispered someone on the hunter ships. "It's trying to communicate." The hunter captain's resolve was cracking. Jake could feel it through the telepathic connection, the man's certainty dissolving under the combined assault of hypnotic suggestion and alien empathy. "Sir," another hunter crew member said, "tactical analysis shows the creature has had multiple opportunities to attack the mining station but hasn't taken them. It's just circling like it's trying to make contact." Jake seized the moment.
"Captain, you have a choice to make.
You can follow orders and destroy something beautiful and ancient and irreplaceable, or you can be the human who made first contact with a truly alien intelligence. Which story do you want to tell your children?" The silence stretched across space, broken only by the hum of ship systems and the steady rhythm of Jake's breathing. Through his connection with the dragon, he could feel the creature holding its breath, waiting to see if these new humans would be friends or enemies. Finally, the hunter captain's voice came across the communication channels, quiet and uncertain. "All ships stand down. Weapons to safe position, sir?" one of his subordinates questioned. "I said stand down." The captain snapped, then his voice softened. "I need to think. We all need to think." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew this was just the beginning. He'd stopped the immediate threat, but the hunters weren't going to simply leave. They'd want answers, proof that the dragon was truly peaceful. And Jake was the only one who could provide that proof. "Dragon," he whispered, using the mental connection they'd established, "I need you to trust me completely now." "Can you do that?" The creature's response came not in words but in a flood of emotion. Gratitude, hope, and a willingness to follow this strange small human wherever he might lead. "Good," Jake said, adjusting his pod's position. "Because we're about to do something that's never been done before. We're going to show these people that humans and dragons can be partners instead of enemies." Through the viewport, Jake could see the hunter ships maintaining their position, but no longer targeting the dragon. It was a start. Now he had to figure out how to turn a tense standoff into genuine cooperation. The space dragon pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost like laughter. For the first time in centuries, it wasn't alone. And for the first time in its life, Jake Morrison was about to attempt the most important repair job of his career, fixing the broken relationship between two species that had never learned to understand each other. The next several hours passed in careful, delicate negotiations. The hunter ships maintained their distance while Jake worked to establish a more stable communication link between the dragon and the humans. The creature, which Jake had begun thinking of as Stellaris, had been remarkably patient during the process. Through their mental connection, Jake learned that Stellaris was not just intelligent, but possessed knowledge that spanned millennia. The dragon had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, had seen stars born and die, had navigated through regions of space that no human ship could survive. But despite all its experience, it had never encountered a species willing to communicate as equals. "Jake," Dr. Kim's voice came through the pod's communication system. "We're receiving some incredible data from your interaction with the creature. Its brain structure is unlike anything we've ever seen. The neural pathways are actually quantum entangled across multiple dimensions." Jake nodded, still maintaining eye contact with Stellaris. Through their link, he could feel the dragon's amusement at being studied. It found human curiosity endearing, like an adult watching a child discover something obvious. Tell me something, Jake said aloud, knowing Stellaris could sense his thoughts. How long have you been alone out here? The answer came as a flood of images and emotions. Jake saw Stellaris as a younger dragon, part of a vast migration of its kind across the galaxy. He witnessed their peaceful exploration of countless worlds, their careful study of developing civilizations, their role as gardeners of intelligence throughout the cosmos. Then came the darkness, a plague that spread through the dragon population, not biological but technological. Some species had developed weapons specifically designed to kill space dragons, harvesting them for their unique properties. The dragon's natural empathy and telepathy, once their greatest strengths, became vulnerabilities that allowed the weapons to spread like viruses through their mental networks. Stellaris was one of the last survivors, possibly the only one left in this entire galactic arm. It had spent centuries hiding, running, forgetting how to trust any other form of life. "I'm sorry," Jake whispered, and meant it. Through their connection, Stellaris felt his genuine empathy and responded with a wave of gratitude that nearly overwhelmed him. The hunter captain's voice interrupted the moment. "Morrison, we need to talk. I'm sending a shuttle over to your station." Jake tensed, but Stellaris projected calm reassurance. The dragon had been monitoring the hunter crew's thoughts and emotions. The captain was genuinely conflicted, not planning any treachery. "Understood," Jake replied, "but I want to try something first. Stellaris, are you willing to let me bring some of the others closer? I think they need to experience what I've experienced." The dragon's response was immediate agreement, tinged with curiosity about how other humans would react to mental contact. Jake guided his maintenance pod back toward the station, with Stellaris following at a respectful distance. The dragon moved with obvious care, its massive form somehow managing to appear graceful and non-threatening despite its size. "Commander," Jake said as he docked, "I need volunteers, people willing to experience direct mental contact with Stellaris." "Is it safe?" Commander Chen asked. "As safe as anything involving a completely alien intelligence can be," Jake replied honestly, "but I think it's necessary. The hunters need to understand what Stellaris really is, and the only way to do that is through direct contact." Dr. Kim volunteered immediately, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Lieutenant Torres stepped forward as well, followed somewhat reluctantly by Chief Engineer Martinez. Jake led them to the observation deck where Stellaris waited just outside the reinforced windows. The dragon's massive head filled most of the view, its eyes glowing with patient intelligence. "Everyone needs to relax," Jake said, slipping into his hypnotic instructor mode. "Breathe slowly, let your minds become calm and open. Stellaris won't force contact, but it can sense your emotional state." Jake placed his hand on the window and felt Stellaris's presence immediately. The dragon carefully extended its telepathic awareness, gently touching the minds of the other humans. Dr. Kim gasped first. "Oh my God, it's like having access to a living library. The things it's seen, the knowledge it possesses." Lieutenant Torres stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "It's so lonely. How did it survive being alone for so long?" Chief Engineer Martinez, typically skeptical of anything that couldn't be measured with instruments, staggered backward. "This is impossible. I can see its memories. It's showing me star charts, navigation routes through hyperspace that shouldn't exist." The hunter shuttle docked while the group was still processing their mental contact with Stellaris. Captain Vance was a tall, stern man with cybernetic implants that marked him as a veteran of the deep space conflicts. He was accompanied by two subordinates and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Morrison?" Captain Vance asked, looking around the observation deck. "That's me," Jake replied, not moving away from the window. "Captain Vance, I presume." "Captain, you need to understand," Dr. Kim said excitedly. "This creature isn't a threat. It's a repository of galactic knowledge. It could help us understand space navigation, stellar formation, the development of consciousness itself." Captain Vance's expression remained skeptical. "Doctor, that creature has destroyed 17 ships in the past 2 years. Its kind are responsible for thousands of deaths." "Because they were defending themselves," Jake said quietly. "Because they've been hunted to near extinction by people like you." The captain's hand moved toward his sidearm, but stopped when Stellaris pressed closer to the window. the dragon's eyes fixed on Vance with an intensity that made the hardened soldier step backward. "It wants to show you something," Jake said. "Are you willing to open your mind to it?" "Absolutely not. I'm not letting some alien parasite into my head." Jake smiled sadly. "Captain, you've spent years hunting these creatures, but you've never actually tried to understand them. You're like someone trying to repair a machine without bothering to learn how it works." "This isn't a repair job, Morrison. This is military protocol." "Protocol based on fear and ignorance," Jake replied, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality again. "But you're better than that. I can see it in your eyes. You became a hunter to protect people, not to commit genocide." Captain Vance's cybernetic implants began to flicker as Stellaris's telepathic field interacted with their electronics. The dragon wasn't trying to control the captain's mind, but its presence was affecting the artificial components of his nervous system. "What's happening?" Vance demanded, touching his temple where the implants were located. "Stellaris is trying to communicate with your cybernetics directly," Jake explained. "It recognizes them as a form of artificial intelligence and wants to establish contact. Tell it to stop." "I can't. This is Stellaris's choice to make." Through the mental link, Jake felt Stellaris's careful probing of the captain's implants. The dragon was fascinated by human technology, particularly the way organic and artificial intelligence could be merged. It began sharing images of its own hybrid nature, showing how its biological form incorporated quantum computing elements that humans hadn't even discovered yet. Captain Vance staggered as the alien knowledge flooded his enhanced awareness. His implants, designed to process battlefield data at superhuman speeds, suddenly had access to information spanning geological ages. "Impossible," he whispered. "The navigation data alone. We could reach the galactic core with this knowledge. We could find Earth's lost colonies." Jake felt a surge of satisfaction. The captain was beginning to understand what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a dangerous animal to be eliminated. This was a partner that could help humanity reach heights they'd never imagined possible. But Jake also sensed something else through his connection with Stellaris. The dragon was growing tired. The effort of maintaining telepathic contact with multiple humans simultaneously was draining its energy reserves. They needed to conclude this interaction soon or risk exhausting their new ally. "Captain," Jake said urgently, "Stellaris needs to rest. But I think you understand now why we can't let the Hunter Protocol continue. This creature represents the greatest opportunity in human history." Captain Vance straightened, his military bearing returning as he processed everything he'd experienced. "Morrison, what exactly are you proposing?" Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything they'd worked toward was balanced on his next words. Through his mental link with Stellaris, he could sense the dragon's exhaustion, but also its hopeful anticipation. "Captain Vance, I'm proposing we change everything," Jake said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent his life solving impossible problems. "Instead of hunting dragons, we partner with them. Instead of harvesting their bodies for technology, we learn from their living knowledge." Captain Vance's cybernetic implants flickered again as residual data from Stellaris continued processing through his enhanced systems. "Morrison, you're talking about overturning decades of military doctrine. The Hunter Corps exists because space dragons are classified as an existential threat to human expansion." "Based on what evidence?" Dr. Kim interjected, still glowing with excitement from her mental contact with Stellaris. "Everything I've seen suggests these creatures are peaceful explorers, not aggressive predators. The attacks only started after we began hunting them." Lieutenant Torres stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "Captain, with respect, I felt its memories. This creature has watched over developing civilizations for millennia. It guided early spacefaring species away from dangerous regions, helped them find habitable worlds. It's not a monster, it's a guardian." Jake placed his hand back on the window, re-establishing his connection with Stellaris. The dragon's massive eye focused on him, and Jake felt a surge of warmth and trust that was almost overwhelming. "Show them," Jake whispered through their mental link. "Show them what you really are." Stellaris pulled back from the station's window and began to transform. The dragon's body elongated, its wings spreading to their full span of nearly 300 meters. Bioluminescent patterns raced along its scales, creating a display that was part star map, part artwork, part mathematical equation. Jake felt Stellaris's consciousness expand. reaching out through hyperspace to touch distant beacons scattered across the galaxy. Other monitoring stations, ancient and automated, began responding to the Dragon's call. The space around the mining station filled with holographic projections showing the locations of lost worlds, abandoned colonies and undiscovered civilizations. Dear God, Chief Engineer Martinez breathed. It's a living navigation network. It knows the location of every inhabited system in the galaxy. Captain Vance stared at the display, his military mind immediately grasping the implications. With this knowledge, we could reunite the scattered human colonies. We could make contact with species we've lost touch with over the centuries. Jake nodded, feeling Stellaris' pleasure at the humans' understanding. But it's more than just navigation data. Stellaris has been studying consciousness itself, watching how intelligence develops across different species. It could help us understand not just where to go, but how to communicate with what we find there. The holographic display shifted, showing the evolution of intelligence across dozens of worlds. Stellaris revealed how consciousness often developed along similar patterns, despite vast differences in biology and environment. The Dragon had been documenting these patterns, creating a kind of universal grammar of sapience. This changes everything, Dr. Kim said, her scientific excitement barely contained. We're not just looking at first contact with an alien species. We're looking at a partnership that could reshape our understanding of life itself. Captain Vance walked closer to the window, his expression thoughtful. Through Jake's connection with Stellaris, he could sense the Dragon carefully monitoring the captain's emotional state, ready to withdraw if it detected hostility. Morrison, Vance said slowly, assuming I accept your proposal, how exactly would this partnership work? I can't simply order the Hunter Corps to stand down without authorization from command. Jake had been thinking about this problem since the first moment he'd made contact with Stellaris. We don't need to change the entire Corps overnight. We start small. A single ship, a volunteer crew, working directly with Stellaris to explore unknown regions of space. A joint human-dragon exploration mission, Lieutenant Torres said, her eyes lighting up with possibility. Think about what we could discover. Stellaris pulsed with approval, projecting images of the adventures they could share. Distant star systems where life had evolved in impossible ways. Ancient ruins left by civilizations that had transcended physical existence. Phenomena at the edge of known space that challenged every law of physics. But Jake also sensed the Dragon's deeper motivation. Stellaris wasn't just offering knowledge, it was offering family. The creature had been alone for so long that it had almost forgotten what it felt like to have companions. The prospect of working alongside humans, of having purpose beyond mere survival, filled it with a joy that was almost childlike in its intensity. I'll need guarantees, Captain Vance said, his practical nature asserting itself. Proof that this creature can be trusted, that it won't turn hostile if the situation changes. Jake was about to respond when Stellaris suddenly pulled away from the window, its massive head swiveling toward empty space. Through their mental link, Jake felt a spike of alarm that made his blood freeze. What is it? He asked aloud. Stellaris' response came as a flood of images and sensations. Something was approaching through hyperspace. Something that radiated malice and hunger. The Dragon's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deep red warning colors as it prepared for combat. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace, the station's communications officer reported. 6 ships, configuration unknown. Through the observation windows, Jake watched as the new arrivals materialized from the distorted space-time of hyperspace transition. These weren't Hunter Corps vessels. They were something else entirely. Their hulls covered in what looked like harvested dragon scales. Their weapon systems clearly built from crystalline dragon teeth. Poachers, Captain Vance spat, his hand moving to his weapon. They're not part of the official Hunter Corps. These are illegal harvesters. The lead poacher ship immediately opened fire, not at Stellaris but at the hunter vessels. The poachers saw the official Corps, ships as competition to be eliminated before they could claim their prize. Jake felt Stellaris' terror spike as the creature recognized the modified dragon parts on the attacking ships, but underneath the fear he sensed something else: determination. The dragon was tired of running. This time it would fight back. Stellaris wants to protect us, Jake announced, translating the dragon's emotions for the others. It's willing to stand and fight. Against 6 armed ships? Captain Vance asked incredulously. Not alone, Jake replied, turning to face the captain. This is it, Vance. This is your chance to prove that humans and dragons can be partners. Will your ships fight alongside Stellaris? The captain hesitated for only a moment before activating his communicator. All hunter vessels, this is Captain Vance. We have illegal poachers engaging our position. You are authorized to return fire and defend the space dragon. Repeat, the dragon is under our protection. Sir, came a confused voice from one of his ships. You heard me. Today we're the good guys. Through the window, Jake watched as Stellaris spread its wings and charged toward the poacher fleet. The dragon's mouth opened, revealing not just teeth but a focusing chamber that concentrated stellar radiation into a beam of pure energy. The attack struck one of the poacher ships, overloading its shields and sending it spinning helplessly through space. The hunter ships moved to flank the dragon, their weapons adding to Stellaris's natural firepower. For the first time in centuries, a space dragon wasn't fighting alone. Jake pressed both hands against the window, pouring every ounce of his will through the mental link. We're with you, he projected to Stellaris. You're not alone anymore. The dragon's response was a surge of gratitude so powerful that everyone in the observation deck could feel it, even those without direct mental contact. Stellaris was finally home. The battle was far from over, but Jake knew they'd already won the most important victory. They'd proven that cooperation was possible between species that had been enemies for generations. Now they just had to survive long enough to share that lesson with the rest of the galaxy. The space battle unfolded with deadly beauty against the starfield. Stellaris moved through the combat zone like a force of nature, its massive form somehow managing to be both graceful and terrifying. The dragon's natural abilities far exceeded anything Jake had imagined. It could phase shift through dimensions to avoid incoming fire, manipulate gravitational fields to deflect missiles, and generate electromagnetic pulses that disrupted enemy targeting systems. But the poachers weren't unprepared. Their ships had been specifically designed to hunt space dragons, equipped with weapons that exploited the creature's natural vulnerabilities. Nets made from quantum-entangled cables that could bind a dragon's dimensional phasing abilities. Sonic disruptors that interfered with their telepathic communication. Worst of all, the ship's hulls were armored with scales from previously killed dragons, creating a kind of psychological warfare that filled Stellaris with grief and rage. Jake, Dr. Kim's voice was urgent through the communication system. Stellaris's neural activity is becoming erratic. The emotional trauma from seeing its kind being used as armor is affecting its combat effectiveness. Through their mental link, Jake felt the dragon's anguish. Every shot fired by the poacher ships was like watching friends and family members being desecrated. Stellaris's attacks were becoming wild, unfocused, driven more by grief than by tactical thinking. I need to get out there, Jake said, heading toward the maintenance bay. Morrison? That's suicide, Captain Vance protested. You'll be flying directly into a combat zone. Stellaris needs me, Jake replied simply. It's losing itself to rage and grief. Someone has to help it stay focused. Jake launched his maintenance pod just as one of the poacher ships managed to score a direct hit on Stellaris's wing membrane. The dragon roared silently in the vacuum, its bioluminescent patterns flashing red with pain and fury. Jake felt the creature's agony through their connection, and it nearly sent him into unconsciousness. Stellaris, Jake called out through their mental link. Stay with me.
Don't let them turn you into what they think you are.
The dragon's massive head turned toward Jake's tiny pod, and for a moment its eyes cleared of the battle rage. Through their connection, Jake projected memories of their first meeting, the moment of understanding they'd shared, the hope they'd built together. Stellaris's emotional state stabilized, its attacks becoming more controlled and precise. The dragon began working in coordination with the hunter ships, using its mobility to draw fire while the human vessels struck with surgical precision. But the poachers had one more trick to play. The lead ship suddenly changed course, heading directly for the mining station instead of engaging the dragon. Jake realized with horror what they were planning. If they couldn't capture Stellaris, they would threaten the humans to force the dragon to surrender. They're going after the station, Jake broadcast on all channels. Captain Vance's ships moved to intercept, but they were too far away. The poacher vessel would reach the mining facility before the hunters could stop it. Jake watched in desperation as weapons ports opened along the attacking ship's hull, preparing to cripple the station's life support systems. That's when Jake felt Stellaris make a decision that terrified him. The dragon was preparing to sacrifice itself to save the humans. No, Jake shouted through their mental link. There has to be another way. But Stellaris was already moving, positioning itself between the poacher ship and the mining station. The dragon spread its wings wide, creating a living shield that would absorb the enemy's fire. Jake felt the creature's resignation and acceptance, its willingness to die to protect the first friends it had found in centuries. Jake's mind raced, searching for alternatives. Then he remembered something from his early hypnosis training, the principle of redirected focus. Instead of trying to stop someone from doing something, you redirect their attention to something else. Stellaris, listen to me, Jake projected with every ounce of mental strength he possessed. You don't have to die to save us. Use what I taught you about human psychology. Turn their own minds against them. Through their connection, Jake felt Stellaris's confusion than understanding. The dragon's telepathic abilities weren't just for communication, they could be used for influence. Just as Jake had demonstrated with the hunter crews, Stellaris focused its mental power on the poacher ship, reaching out to touch the minds of its crew. But where Jake's hypnotic influence had been gentle and subtle, the dragon's telepathic assault was like a tidal wave of alien consciousness. The poacher crew suddenly found themselves experiencing Stellaris's memories directly. They felt the creature's centuries of loneliness, its desperate search for companionship, its grief over the extinction of its kind. But more than that, they experienced the dragon's perspective on their own actions. Through Stellaris's eyes, they saw themselves as the monsters in their own story. They felt the terror of being hunted, the agony of watching friends die, the degradation of seeing their bodies harvested for profit. The psychological impact was devastating. "Unknown ship, this is Captain Garrett," came a shaking voice over the communication channels. We're standing down, shutting down weapons and requesting permission to withdraw." The other poacher ships quickly followed suit, their crews overwhelmed by the telepathic experience of their victims' perspective. One by one, they powered down their weapons and began retreating from the combat zone. Jake felt a wave of exhaustion wash over Stellaris. The dragon had pushed its telepathic abilities far beyond their normal limits, and the effort had drained its energy reserves dangerously low. "It's okay," Jake projected through their connection. "You did it. You saved everyone without having to kill anyone." Stellaris's response was a mixture of surprise and wonder. The dragon had never considered that its enemies might be capable of redemption, that showing them the truth might be more effective than violence. Captain Vance's voice crackled over the communication channels. "All ships, maintain defensive positions but do not pursue the retreating vessels. Morrison, get back to the station. I think we all need to process what just happened." As Jake guided his maintenance pod back toward the docking bay, he felt Stellaris following at a respectful distance. The dragon was different now, changed by the experience of using its abilities to heal rather than harm. Through their mental connection, Jake sensed a new confidence in the creature, a belief that cooperation and understanding were truly possible. But he also sensed something else. Other dragons far across the galaxy had felt Stellaris's telepathic broadcast. For the first time in centuries, the ancient creature was no longer completely alone. There were others of its kind still alive, hidden in the deep reaches of space, and they were beginning to respond to the call. "Dr. Kim," Jake said as he docked, "I hope you're ready for some really interesting research. I think we're about to have more test subjects than we know what to do with." The space around the mining station began to shimmer as new arrivals started dropping out of hyperspace. Not poacher ships this time, but something far more magnificent. Other space dragons, drawn by Stellaris's call, were coming to investigate this unprecedented alliance between their kind and the strange, small creatures that had once been their enemies. Jake smiled as he felt Stellaris's joy through their connection. The real adventure was just beginning. They'd proven that cooperation was possible between humans and dragons. Now they had to figure out how to build a lasting partnership between two species that were more different than anyone had ever imagined. The future of galactic civilization might very well depend on a mechanic who believed that anything broken could be fixed, and a lonely dragon who had finally learned to trust again. 3 months later, mining station Kepler 442 had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The first joint human-dragon research facility. What had once been a simple mining outpost was now a bustling center of interspecies cooperation, with observation decks, communication arrays, and specialized laboratories designed to accommodate both human scientists and space dragons. Jake stood in the main observation lounge, watching 7 magnificent dragons glide through space in complex patterns around the station. Each creature was unique, with different scale colorations and bioluminescent patterns that told the story of their individual journeys through the cosmos. Stellaris was the largest, but Jake had learned that size among space dragons corresponded more to age and experience than to dominance. "The cultural exchange data is remarkable," Dr. Kim said, joining Jake at the observation window. She carried a tablet displaying brain scans that would have been considered impossible just a few months earlier. "We're documenting the first real-time study of telepathic intelligence. The dragon's quantum-entangled neural networks operate on principles we're only beginning to understand." Through his enhanced mental connection with Stellaris, Jake could feel the presence of all 7 dragons simultaneously. It was like being part of a vast ancient conversation that spanned light years. The dragons communicated in overlapping layers of thought, emotion, and memory, creating a collective consciousness that was both individual and unified. "Any word from Earth Command?" Jake asked. Dr. Kim nodded. "Official recognition of the Dragon Accords came through this morning. Captain Vance's report convinced them that partnership is not only possible, but strategically essential. The Hunter Corps is being restructured into the Explorer Corps, with a mandate to seek cooperation rather than elimination." Jake smiled, remembering the long negotiations that had led to this moment. It hadn't been easy convincing Earth's government that creatures they'd considered mortal enemies could become humanity's greatest allies. But the proof was undeniable. In just 3 months, the dragons had shared navigation data that opened up entire sectors of previously unexplored space, scientific knowledge that advanced human understanding by centuries, and cultural insights that were reshaping philosophy and psychology across human space. "Morrison," Captain Vance's voice came through the intercom. "You're needed in the communications center. We're receiving some interesting transmissions." Jake made his way through the station's corridors, noting how the facility had adapted to accommodate both species. The walls now featured bioluminescent panels that allowed the dragons to communicate directly with the station's computer systems. Human crew members wore translation devices that converted dragon telepathy into audible speech, while the dragons had learned to modulate their mental communications to avoid overwhelming human consciousness. In the communications center, Jake found Captain Vance standing before a holographic display, showing the entire local galactic arm. Dozens of new signals were appearing across the star map, each one representing first contact with previously unknown civilizations. "The Dragon's navigation network has gone fully active," Vance explained. "They're not just showing us where things are, they're introducing us to species we never knew existed. Look at this." The display focused on a solar system 40 light-years away, where a young civilization had just achieved faster-than-light travel. Jake watched as one of their partner dragons approached the species' primitive ships, using the same gentle communication techniques that Stellaris had taught them. "They're not just helping us explore," Jake realized. "They're helping us become ambassadors to the galaxy." Through his mental link with Stellaris, Jake felt the dragon's satisfaction. This was what the ancient creatures had always been meant to do: guide younger species toward peaceful contact with the galactic community. Humanity's natural curiosity and adaptability made them ideal partners in this mission. "There's more," Captain Vance continued. "We've been receiving requests from other human colonies. Everyone wants dragon partners. The applications for the Explorer Corps have increased by 3,000%. Jake walked over to the window, where he could see Stellaris floating just outside. The dragon's massive form was relaxed, its bioluminescent patterns showing contentment and purpose. Through their connection, Jake felt the creature's deep satisfaction at no longer being alone, at having found not just companions but a shared mission. "Stellaris wants to show me something," Jake announced, heading toward the docking bay where his maintenance pod waited. The little craft had been extensively modified over the past months, equipped with life support systems that could function independently for weeks and communication arrays that amplified his telepathic connection with the dragons. As Jake launched from the station, Stellaris moved alongside him with the fluid grace that never ceased to amaze him. Through their mental link, the dragon began sharing a vision of the future. Jake saw human dragon teams exploring the galactic core, making contact with ancient civilizations that existed in forms beyond physical matter. He witnessed the establishment of a galactic council where hundreds of species worked together to solve problems that spanned star systems. But most importantly, Jake saw what they had built together, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared curiosity, and the understanding that the universe was vast enough for all forms of consciousness to thrive. You know, Jake said aloud, knowing Stellaris could sense his thoughts. When I first became a mechanic, I thought I'd spend my life fixing machines. I never imagined I'd end up fixing relationships between entire species. Stellaris's response came as a wave of warm amusement. The dragon had learned human humor over the past months and found Jake's tendency toward understatement endlessly entertaining. Other dragons began joining them, creating a formation that was part dance, part celebration, part demonstration of the harmony they'd achieved. Jake felt their collective joy through his connection with Stellaris, but also their determination. They had work to do, a galaxy to explore, and countless civilizations to bring together. Ready for our next mission? Jake asked, adjusting his pod's navigation systems. Long-range sensors had detected signs of artificial structures in a system that supposedly contained only gas giants and asteroid fields. It was exactly the kind of mystery that the human-dragon partnership was meant to investigate. Stellaris pulsed with anticipation, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to show star charts and navigation routes. The other dragons moved into exploration formation, their ancient knowledge and human curiosity combining to create something greater than either species could achieve alone. As they jumped to hyperspace, Jake reflected on how much had changed since that day when alarms had screamed through mining station Kepler 442. He'd been just a mechanic trying to fix a broken fusion drive. Now he was part of something that was reshaping the entire galaxy. The universe was full of broken things, he'd learned. Misunderstandings between species, conflicts born of fear and ignorance, relationships damaged by centuries of mistrust. But Jake Morrison had built his life on a simple principle. Anything broken could be fixed if you understood how it worked and cared enough to try. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, fixing something broken could create something beautiful beyond imagination. Through the observation ports of ships across human space, children pressed their faces to the glass and pointed in wonder at the dragons flying alongside their vessels. A new generation was growing up in a universe where cooperation between species wasn't just possible, but normal, where the greatest adventures lay not in conquest but in understanding. Jake smiled as hyperspace enveloped them, carrying the human dragon team toward their next discovery. He'd found his calling among the stars, and it was exactly what he'd always done, taking broken things and making them work better than they ever had before. The only difference was that now, his workshop was the entire galaxy,